On their wedding night, the groom took off the bride's dress, saw IT, and fled the bedroom. The parents were stunned. "Darling, I don't understand what happened. Can you please tell me what's wrong?" Emma stood in the middle of the bedroom, staring intently at the man she deeply loved. Ethan. This was the wedding night they had waited for so long. The young woman was confused, unable to grasp why the man she loved, for whom she had deliberately saved her purity until the wedding, had violently pushed her away the moment she took off her dress. Ethan, unable to find the words to explain anything to Emma, shot out of the room like a bullet. Hearing the commotion, his parents emerged from their own bedroom. Seeing their son rushing out of the house, they tried to call him back and find out what was wrong. But the young man didn't respond to their cries. He needed to be alone. He was simultaneously horrified and confused, and didn't know what to do. Fleeing the house, he went wherever his feet would take him, and sitting on the bank of the river near the cottage community, he buried his face in his hands and wept. "It can't be a coincidence," he thought to himself, unable to believe the cruel twist of fate that had befallen him. The moment the woman he loved more than anyone else in the world took off her dress, his entire world came crashing down. He had never imagined such a thing was even possible, but he knew he wouldn't be able to stay away from home. Sooner or later, he would have to cross that threshold and talk to his father about everything. But that would be much later. Just not now. It would be too much. "Emma, what happened between you two?" Constance asked anxiously, seeing the girl coming downstairs. The luxurious wedding dress, which all the young female guests had envied at the reception, was now crumpled. Emma had managed to pull it on with difficulty. If she hadn't looked in the mirror, she wouldn't even remember having just taken it off. If she appeared outside the bedroom looking like that, she would die of shame. At that moment, answering questions from her new father and mother-in-law was the last thing she wanted. The pain from everything that had transpired between her and Ethan was too intense. Silently rushing out of the house, she ran to the road, flagged down the first passing car, and drove home. "Are you all right?" the driver asked worriedly, seeing the distraught look on her face. Her tear-filled eyes spoke volumes, but Emma wasn't about to confide in a stranger. She merely nodded in response to the taxi driver and asked him to drive faster. When she stepped over the threshold of her mother's apartment, where she had lived all her life, she burst into tears. Her mother, Deborah, didn't understand what was happening, and was terrified when her daughter flew into the house in the middle of the night in a wrinkled dress and smudged makeup. "What is it, my girl?" Deborah wailed. "Did he dare to hurt you in some way?" The woman had liked her daughter's fiancé, and was certain that Emma would be able to build a strong family with Ethan. There was one thing that had always bothered her, but Deborah wasn't the type to worry about the past, so she chose not to stir up events from long ago that once held significant meaning in her life. What was done, and stirring up old memories was pointless. But when Emma told her about the incident in the bedroom, the woman seriously considered that she might finally have to talk to Alexander. She immediately guessed where the problem lay, but couldn't believe such a thing was possible. The woman was sure it was some kind of mistake, so she tried her best to comfort her daughter, who sat across from her on the sofa, sobbing bitterly. "You can't even imagine, Mom," she exclaimed, sniffling. "He insulted me like no one ever has. God, how I regret that you raised me to be so proper. I did everything just as you always told me. No boys, nothing before marriage. And what did I get in return for my honesty? A husband running out of the bedroom who rejected me on our very first night and did it in the most humiliating way. Why do I deserve this? Tell me, why me? Deborah didn't know how to answer her daughter, but she was firmly convinced of what had caused Ethan's behavior. It plagued her, and could no longer remain a secret between her and Alexander. She had to talk to him, and she would do it tomorrow. The call from the past came as a surprise to the man, but they were relatives now, weren't they? What was the big deal? Why do you need to meet, if you don't mind me asking? He asked in surprise when he heard Deborah's voice on the phone. I don't think we have anything to discuss. If you want to ask about Ethan and Emma, I don't understand what happened myself. Ethan ran away from home yesterday, only came back this morning, and without saying a word, went to his room and hasn't come out yet. Maybe your daughter told you something. I'd be very interested to know, too. Deborah insisted on a personal meeting, and Alexander had no choice but to agree. Just not at my house, he said. You know Constance doesn't work. She's all eyes and ears, and it's impossible to hide anything from her. The woman understood, so she drove to the restaurant where Alexander had arranged to meet. Sitting across from him, she said without preamble, You have to get a DNA test, and as soon as possible. It's possible that Emma is your daughter, and that's why Ethan avoided intimacy with her. Most likely, he saw something he never saw before the wedding. You know, my Emma is a proper girl, and things never went beyond kissing until the wedding night. Alexander stared at Deborah with wide eyes, hardly believing what she was saying. No, he would never deny their past connection, nor did he intend to forget or erase any period of his life. But a child? A shared child? It didn't make sense. She had been married. She was still married. For Deborah herself, the whole situation was also a precursor to significant problems. All these years, she was certain that Emma was Robert's daughter. How could it be otherwise? He was her lawful husband, with whom she had lived for over 20 years, a loving father and a loyal friend. They always understood each other. Yes, Deborah often lacked passion in the relationship, so she occasionally looked for it elsewhere. Robert was a serious and thorough man. Science mattered much more to him than carnal pleasures, which he saw more as unavoidable duties in a marriage. He never particularly wanted children, either. When his daughter was born, he was happy and tried to be a good father. But Emma was never the meaning of his life, as other children are for their fathers. He had a cause he was devoted to, and family always took second place. Deborah was calm and understanding about her husband's priorities, as she herself was too busy achieving things in the medical field, and she also had absolutely no time for domestic problems, pots, and other similar concerns, which she devoted time to only a couple of times a week, and in return always received nothing but gratitude from her husband, for whom comfort and daily life meant absolutely nothing, and not a gram of criticism. I have to talk to my son first, Alexander replied thoughtfully after listening to Deborah. Let's first make sure your assumptions are not baseless, and if it turns out to be true, then, of course, I will do a DNA test. He left the meeting with a heavy heart. The man had long since forgotten about the close relationship he once had with this woman. It was a very long time ago. They worked together at the university in different departments, and both he and she lacked a spark in their family lives. They never advertised what was happening between them and tried in every way to hide it. There was no need for rumors or gossip. Alexander would not dare give his wife, who loved him very much, and would likely never forgive him for cheating, a reason for jealousy. But he didn't know what to do now. Returning home, the first thing the man did was knock on Ethan's room door. By then, the young man had slept and somewhat recovered. Although he wasn't ready for a constructive dialogue, Ethan had to talk to his father and explain himself. It didn't take long, but it immediately put everything in its place. "She has a huge mole on her chest," Ethan said, as if anticipating his father's question. "A huge one, shaped like a star. Only my late grandmother, your mother, Laura, had one like that. You must remember. She was always embarrassed by it and hid it from everyone. You remember how happy she was that this terrible mark hadn't passed on to you? Dad, this can't be a coincidence, can it? So, Emma is your daughter? Is that it?" Alexander wasn't surprised by his son's insight. If Ethan hadn't suspected the obvious, he wouldn't have fled the bedroom on his wedding night. "Son, I am so guilty towards you," Alexander began to lament. "I shouldn't have allowed this marriage. I knew Emma was Deborah's daughter, and that I had a relationship with her. I should have considered that things might not be so simple. Forgive me, son, if you can." Out of all the institute, out of all the classmates, he had chosen her. Ethan liked Emma from the very first glance, and at a certain point, he realized he couldn't imagine his future life without this girl, and if he didn't ask her out and someone else came along, he would never forgive himself. She returned his feelings almost immediately, which made Ethan very happy. He wanted to propose to her as quickly as possible so they could have a complete family even before graduating. What more was there to wish for? He would get his education, find a job, and had met the woman he loved. It seemed, what else did he need from life? Ethan wished for nothing more and was incredibly grateful for what he already had. The young man could never have imagined that things would turn out this way. Before the wedding, he hadn't allowed any liberties, as he knew that Emma, like himself, was raised in a strict and proper family, and what modern youth now called a serious relationship or trial marriage was not, and never would be, the case for them. And Ethan strongly regretted it. If they hadn't adhered to such strict principles and had gone ahead with intimacy before the wedding, there wouldn't have been a wedding at all. And now what? He got married, and now he had to divorce. And how could he live on after everything that had happened? When would he be able to love someone again? And if no one else ever captured his heart as intensely as she did, would he have to spend the rest of his life alone? These questions plagued not only Ethan, but also Emma, who was equally distraught after everything that had happened. Deborah decided to explain herself to her daughter only after the DNA test results came back, and Alexander informed her about them. "It's all confirmed," he sighed, when the woman picked up the phone. "It turns out Emma is my daughter, and Ethan is my son, and since they are half-siblings, they cannot be together." Deborah pondered for a long time how to delicately tell her daughter about the events of long ago. It was very important to the woman that her daughter not judge her for cheating on her father. And how would Robert himself react to the fact that he had raised a daughter who wasn't his own flesh and blood all his life? Could he forgive his wife's betrayal? Or would he not react at all, because he simply didn't care? When Deborah realized she could no longer torment herself with endless thoughts and conjectures, she resolved to have an honest conversation with both her daughter and her husband. "Mom, how could this be?" Emma exclaimed, after listening to Deborah. "So, you taught me to live by principles you never followed yourself? What about the love, fidelity, and everything you always preached to me? You instilled in me from a young age that you must be honest in a relationship, but it turns out you yourself cheated on Dad and didn't see anything wrong with it. How could you?" Emma's disappointment knew no bounds. The girl could not fathom that her mother, who had always been the embodiment of an exemplary wife, was capable of banal and dirty infidelity. After the conversation, Emma couldn't and didn't want to hear or see the woman. She needed time to get over everything that had happened, and she wasn't even sure she could ever forgive and accept her mother's actions. Robert reacted much more calmly. Unlike Emma, whom her mother had indeed raised within overly strict boundaries, he took life much easier. Yes, he learned that Emma wasn't his daughter, and that he would never have biological children, but this didn't greatly affect his life. And how could it affect the life of a man so engrossed in science that he noticed nothing and no one else? "Don't worry," Robert said after listening to his wife. "Nothing terrible has happened. Emma will understand everything eventually, and your relationship will mend. Trust me." At that moment, Emma was so desperate that she wanted nothing. She struggled to force herself to continue her studies at the institute, which she wanted to drop out of just to avoid seeing Ethan. Classmates, who had been so happy about their wedding, were shocked by the sudden breakup. Neither Emma nor Ethan could avoid awkward questions, so they made a joint decision that should once and for all put an end to the gossip and discussion of their relationship. Gathering all their friends, the young couple openly announced that they were brother and sister, which further shocked their already surprised friends. "Yes, that's what happened," Ethan exclaimed, when the murmur in the crowd subsided a little. "You can think and say whatever you want, whatever you deem necessary, but don't you dare spread rumors. We are not strangers after all, and you should have some respect for each other." After this remark, the classmates stopped discussing Ethan and Emma in the corridors. On the contrary, they sincerely sympathized with them. It must be awful and terrifying when you genuinely love a person but realize you can never be with them because you are related. And that is not only against the law, but also against morality. No one would wish such an experience on anyone. This thought was shared by absolutely all the young people's classmates, but neither Ethan nor Emma expected to receive such powerful support from friends, whom they had never taken seriously as potential partners, as they noticed no one but each other. "If I were you, I wouldn't be so upset," George said to Emma when they were having tea together in the cafeteria. "All sorts of things happen in life. It turned out the way it did. What can you do now? You will find your love. You definitely will. I have no doubt about it." The young man had long felt an attraction to the girl, but had never dared to admit it. All of Emma's thoughts were preoccupied with Ethan, and she spent all her free time with him. And after the young couple announced their engagement, George hadn't counted on anything at all, not even friendship. "It's a good thing that in our families it was customary to celebrate the wedding only with parents and their friends," Ethan said one day, when he and Emma accidentally ran into each other in the hallway during a break and decided to talk. "Can you imagine what would have happened at the Institute the next day if we had invited all this high society to our wedding?" "I don't even want to imagine it," agreed Emma, who tried not to meet him face to face even during lectures. "We would never live down all of that. How are you, by the way? How are things?" Ethan didn't really want to continue this conversation, as he simply didn't know what to tell Emma. There was complete chaos at home. Constance did nothing but talk about divorce. He and his father barely saw each other. Since she found out about her husband's infidelity and that he had an illegitimate daughter, the woman was beside herself. Her suffering and pain were so great that she completely withdrew. Ethan tried his best to comfort his mother and convince her that nothing terrible had happened, and that such things sometimes occur. But she wouldn't even talk to him. The young man felt very heavy-hearted, and not so much because of what happened between him and Emma, as because of his mother and father. He really didn't want his parents to divorce and was ready to do anything to prevent it. It was very difficult to mend the family relationship, but after a few months, the ice began to melt. Constance, realizing that she wasn't ready to lose Alexander, whom she still loved despite everything, stopped talking about divorce and decided to have a heart-to-heart with her husband. The man did not regret his past actions. He was convinced that those were matters of the distant past, and it was best to forget about them. He had never loved Deborah, and she hadn't loved him either. It was a fleeting fling, and it was very important to him that Constance understood this. But at the same time, he wanted his daughter to be part of his life and sincerely hoped that Constance would accept Emma, but no longer as a daughter-in-law, but as a stepdaughter. "I have nothing against you communicating," the woman said, "especially since she and Ethan have already acknowledged themselves as half-siblings and treat each other purely as friends. As far as I know, our son has found a new girlfriend, and he'll introduce her to us soon." Ethan had told not only his mother but also his father about Natalie, so Alexander was also aware that a wedding was on the horizon. Emma's personal life also improved, which undoubtedly pleased Deborah, who with great difficulty managed to mend her relationship with her daughter after everything that had happened. "I think we should get married on the same day," Ethan suggested when discussing the future wedding with Emma, Natalie, and George. "And this time, we'll invite not only our parents but also our friends. I think that would be right." The parents couldn't have been happier that their children had found happiness. Alexander thoroughly prepared for both his daughter's and son's weddings, purchasing a separate apartment for each young couple. "I think this will be enough for now," he said, handing the newlyweds the keys. "Well, later you'll go to work and expand yourselves. You don't plan to have 7 children right away. You'll figure it out." For the wedding, Emma deliberately wore a dress that revealed the mole that her grandmother had always been ashamed of. She saw nothing terrible in her birthmark. On the contrary, its shape was very interesting and unusual. When the girl was first born, Deborah was very concerned about it. The woman took the girl to several doctors to get their verdicts that the spot was definitely not malignant and didn't need to be removed. What a blessing that there wasn't a single doctor then who tried to persuade me to remove the mole. She shared her memories with her daughter. "It's scary to imagine what would have happened if you didn't have it. I would never have found out that you are not my husband's daughter, and you and Ethan would never have divorced. That's terrible." In response, Emma just nodded. She had no desire at all to continue this topic. Why go back to what was already past? They had sorted everything out. Their relationships had improved. And now she had 2 fathers. Emma was not against communicating with Alexander and had no intention of cutting the man out of her life. But at the same time, Robert was, is, and forever will remain the person who raised her and was always there for her. And he always agreed with everything. The man was the only one among them who was not greatly affected by the family drama. He always gave preference to science, and even on the day of his daughter's wedding, he was at a conference and only came by at the end of the celebration to congratulate Emma on the start of her family life and her move to a new apartment.